Ray returned to the river again at dawn. The sky was still pink and blue, and the wind was soft across the grass. The prince had not changed. But the spiral was gone. He stood over the place where the fossil had sunk. The water had dried slightly, leaving a clean circle of stone. No moss, no cracks, no sign of time. Only silence. Something had shifted. He didn't know what it meant, only that something was now watching him. Not in fear or anger, but with a kind of waiting. A test. Ray packed his notebook, his ruler, and a small bag of supplies. He followed the path of the footprints once more. They led deeper than he had gone before, past the old trees, through the shallow reeds, and into the marsh. He had always stopped here. Today he did not. The ground softened under his shoes. Mud clung to his steps. The air smelled of wet roots and old water. Birds called from far off, but no animals moved close by. It was too quiet. He found another spiral. This time it was on the trunk of a fallen tree. Not carved. Not marked. Just pressed, as if the tree had grown around the memory of a print. And beside it, a second fossil. Smaller. Rounder. A section of vertebrae, still embedded in dried earth. Ray dug carefully. As he uncovered it, the earth trembled. Not in a sudden quake, but in slow, steady pulses, like a heartbeat. Then the sound returned. The deep breath. It came from the trees, from the sky, from the ground beneath him. He looked up. The mist had returned. Shapes moved within it. Not clear. But tall. Towering. Walking. Not just one now. 3. Their necks stretched above the tree line. Their tails swayed gently behind them. They did not move toward him, but around him, in slow circles. As if completing something. Ray stepped forward. The ground felt warm under his feet. He crossed the marsh and climbed a small rise where the earth was dry. From there, he could see the whole bend of the river, the patterns of prints, the leaning trees, the path the Sauroposeidon had once walked. He opened his notebook. He began to draw. Not from imagination. From memory. The prints. The spirals. The patterns in the trees. The way the water moved in rings when he stood still. And the way the creatures moved, not like animals, but like a living story. He drew until the page was full. Then he heard it. A cracking sound. Behind him. He turned and saw the ground splitting, not in destruction, but in opening. Like a door. From the crack rose a soft light. Ray approached. Inside was a cavern, not large, but smooth and rounded. The walls shimmered with fossil imprints. Leaves, shells, tiny bones. All arranged in circles. At the center stood a stone pedestal. On it, another fossil. The skull of a Sauroposeidon. Ray stepped inside. The air grew warm and still. The skull faced him. Its empty eyes did not look dead. They looked waiting. Ray placed his notebook at the base of the pedestal. Then the light flared. Images filled the space. Not just memories. Not just bones. Histories. Forests under shallow seas. Herds of Sauroposeidon crossing vast plains. Storms reshaping the coast. Rivers shifting paths over centuries. Ray saw time not as a line, but as a circle. Like the spiral. He saw himself walking through it. He was small, yes, but not forgotten. Chosen. The creatures did not need to return in flesh. They returned in memory. And the memory needed a guardian. Not a scientist. Not a hunter. A witness. Someone who would carry the story forward. Ray stepped back from the pedestal. The cavern dimmed. The images faded. But one remained. The spiral. Not just on the wall. On his hand. Faint. Not burned. Not inked. Just there. A mark. He left the cavern and climbed the rise again. The three sauroposeidon shapes still moved in the mist. He raised his hand. They stopped. They faced him. Then slowly, each one bent its neck down, not to bow, but to offer. The light in Ray's chest bloomed. He understood now. This was not a message for the world. It was a message for the land. The river. The trees. The stone. The spiral had no end. And he would keep walking it. Ray didn't go back to school the next day. Instead, he spent the morning walking the spiral path left behind by the sauroposeidon's prints. The mist had lifted, but he still felt the presence of the great shapes around him. They were no longer visible, but their weight stayed in the air. Each step he took brought the world into sharper focus. The trees leaned differently now. The river ran clearer. The grass grew in arcs that matched the spiral pattern. Nature had changed. Or perhaps he had simply learned how to see it. By midday he reached the far edge of the river, where the last footprint stood on its own. A massive depression in the earth, still firm after all the storms. He stepped into it and stood completely still. Birds returned. A hawk flew overhead. Dragonflies buzzed low near the surface of the water. And then he heard a voice, not loud, not human. Just a soft sound inside his thoughts. Remember the weight. Hold the rhythm. He didn't speak it aloud, but he nodded. The spiral was inside him now. Not just as a mark. As a way of moving. Of living. He walked back slowly, taking care not to disturb anything. Every branch mattered. Every stone. When he returned home, he placed the spiral sketch on his bedroom wall. It was not perfect, but it held the shape of what he had seen. His notebook sat beneath it, open to the first footprint he had drawn. On the windowsill lay the shell of the second fossil he had found, light as driftwood now, no longer heavy with time. That night he didn't dream. He listened. The river outside spoke in steady tones. The ground shifted in quiet turns. Something was rebuilding. The next morning, Ray visited the Science Museum. He waited in line with his spiral sketch rolled under his arm. When it was his turn, he asked to speak with the paleontology curator. The receptionist looked skeptical, but agreed to call her. She arrived, tired-eyed and polite. Ray showed her the drawing. Then the photos he had taken. Then the fossil piece. At first, she thought it was a replica. Then she leaned in closer. The color drained from her face. She asked questions, where he had found it, when, how deep, how old he thought it was. He answered honestly. She stared at him in silence for a while. Then she said she needed to make a few calls. 2 weeks passed. The site was visited by scientists, professors, reporters. But Ray said nothing about the spiral. Or the figures in the mist. He only pointed them toward the prints, the fossil, the path. They didn't ask about the spirals. They saw data. He saw memory. That was enough. One night, weeks later, he stood at the river again. The sky was filled with stars. The air was still. He walked back to the cavern that had opened for him. But it was gone now. Covered by grass and stone, like it had never been there. Still, the spiral mark on his hand remained. He traced it softly. Then he turned and walked home. The scientists published papers. They gave names. They described Sauroposeidon as ancient, tall, peaceful. But they never spoke about what it meant to walk beside something so old it remembered the shape of the wind. Ray kept that part for himself. He knew the spiral had no end. It would keep returning, in different ways, different places. And when it did, someone would be there to notice. Someone would listen. And the memory would live again. The story of the Sauroposeidon discovery became part of the town's identity. A museum was built near the site. Tourists came to take pictures. Children walked through replica footprints, wide-eyed and amazed. Scientists held talks about the prehistoric swamp, the fossil bed, and the significance of the tallest dinosaur to walk the earth. Ray never spoke about the spiral. He never mentioned the mist or the vision of the towering shapes that circled the forest. He visited the site often, though, sometimes alone, sometimes with a sketchpad. He'd walk the path quietly and observe the changes in the trees, the curve of the river, the feel of the soil. Even when the prints began to fade over the years, worn by weather and curious feet, he remembered exactly where each one had been. He could still feel the rhythm of their stride in the ground. As he grew older, he studied geology and paleontology, but always kept a distance between the facts and what he had experienced that day. He believed in science, yes, but he also believed in memory, and that some truths lived in patterns too large to measure. One afternoon, after a university lecture he gave on fossil distribution, a young girl approached him. She held a notebook in her arms and asked if he had ever seen something strange. Not a ghost or a monster, but something old that made the air feel different. Ray looked at her quietly. Then he smiled. He took a pen and drew the spiral on the edge of her notebook. "Watch the river," he said. "And listen when it's quiet." The girl nodded and ran off. Ray stood there for a long time. He had never told anyone about the spiral before. But something had changed. The memory was ready to move again. That night, he returned to the river one more time. The forest was darker than he remembered, but it welcomed him like an old friend. He found the highest rise where he once stood as a boy, and sat down. The mist returned. Not heavy, not strange. Soft. Welcoming. And in it, movement. Not three shapes now. One. One towering shadow, long-necked and slow, walking through memory. Its eyes glowed faintly like distant stars. It moved without sound, its feet pressing gently into the spiral of time. It walked around him once. And then it stopped. Ray stood. He placed his hand over his heart. The spiral mark had faded from his skin years ago. But now he felt it inside his chest. Still there. Still alive. The Sauroposeidon lowered its head. Ray did not speak. He didn't need to. The creature turned slowly and began to walk forward, into the mist, into the land, into the shape of history once more. Ray watched until it disappeared. Then he sat down again. He took out a new notebook. He began to draw. Not to explain. Not to prove. Just to remember. Because the spiral was not meant to be solved. It was meant to be seen. To be followed. To be carried. He closed the notebook and placed it beside him. The wind stirred the grass. The river shimmered. And the weight of time sat gently on the land once more.